Welcome y bienvenidos to our LHC membership webinars. This is a webinar series put together for the members of LHC as part of your benefits for your membership. This is the fourth presentation that we've had this year. We're looking to do 4 more in 2025. So of course, keep up with your LHC membership. And if you're not a member, we encourage you all to check out our website, consider membership. It helps us with our programs, with putting together programs just like this. And our members do get early access to this, but this will be recorded and published in 1 week on our website, as well as our social medias. So before we get started, I do want to mention that we have our next membership webinar scheduled for Wednesday, February 12th, 2025. That's next year. It's going to be at 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific time. And this one is titled Beyond the Bases, Latinx Heritage in Baseball's History. That's featuring Wes Singletary, who's an author and historian out of Florida, as well as Jen Moran, who is a staff member with Latinos in Heritage Conservation. They're going to have conversations and a whole webinar conversation about baseball history. All right, and now with that, I'm going to come through and introduce our speakers today. So our panelists, we have an amazing set of panelists. Today, we will be talking on oral histories from all around the country. And first, we're going to start, the presentation order today will be started by Elena Foulis, followed by Marta Martínez, and wrapped up by Karina Amalbert. So I'm going to go through the intros very quickly, and then we'll get the presentation started. So starting with Marta V. Martínez is the executive director and founder of Rhode Island Latino Arts. She is a community oral historian and also founder of Nuestra Latino Oral History Projects of Rhode Island. Martínez published a book in 2014 based on her work with Nuestras Raíces and received her bachelor's degree from Providence College, a master's in journalism from the George Washington University, and her doctorate from Providence College in 2020. Next up, we'll have Karina Amalbert. Karina is an ABD, all but dissertation student in the Urban Regional Planning candidate, researching radical and insurgent planning conversations in Puerto Rico. Currently, she is an instructor in the Upper Division Undergraduate Sustainable Development in the Americas, challenging students to engage with SDG goals. She currently serves as a geospatial project manager for Latinos in Heritage Conservation, one of our staff members, and she's overseeing our Abuelas online platform and many of our other mapping needs. She's also co-creating an online presence on Instagram as The Planning Rogue, aimed at making urban planning accessible and fun for all. And last but not least, we do have Elena Foulis, who currently serves as an assistant professor and director of Spanish language studies at Texas A&M University, San Antonio. And she previously served as a clinical associate professor and associate director for the Center of Ethnic Studies in Ohio. I'm sorry, and also the previous director of Latinos in Ohio and the current producer of the Latino Stories podcast. So check both of those out. Elena has experience working with statewide community organizations that serve Latino populations. As a teacher or scholar, she focuses on these communities, helping them preserve their stories. So with that, I think that's everybody's introduction. I'm going to let a couple folks into the room, and we're going to pass the floor over to Elena. You should have the ability to share your screen. And just so you all know, just a real quick recap, everybody's welcome to put questions in the chat. We'll be monitoring throughout. Our panelists are going to present one by one. At the very end of this webinar, we'll break for a Q&A with the audience. So y'all will be asked to put in any questions. If you have anything that comes to mind, don't be shy, put it in the chat. Let us know where you're tuning in from. And with that, passing it over to Elena. Thank you.
Thank you, Rene. I'm happy to be here talking about one of my passion projects, and that is oral history. I will share with you about the work that I started a few years ago on oral narratives of Latinos in Ohio when I was during my time at Ohio State University. That work continues to exist, and we continue to add to the archive. And I know a lot of the people here in this room know what oral history is or understand, but I wanted to provide just a couple of things to get us started, especially as I'm working on a manuscript about oral history, working with the Latino community, doing oral history projects. And so I'll read this for you. Oral history is inherently dialogic. It is one that promotes reciprocity and reflection as both narrators and interviewers come together to learn and reflect about their stories. For Latino communities or Latino students, it provides a critical framework for exploring the Latino imaginary, as Flores defines it, while also exploring the complexity of the U.S. Latina community and where they fit within it. And I provide this definition because a lot of the work that I've done with oral history centers or includes students in one way or another. And so I'll mention that as well. So for me, oral histories with Latinos and Latinas in the US is a community engaged practice. And it is transformative because we take the time to understand our community, or we should take the time, right, to understand our community, gather their input to design and conduct a project, and consider how or what they want to highlight about themselves. So the project doesn't come from me just as a one single person, but it comes with that in dialogue with the community, with students. What is the project going to look like and why? So I started this Oral Narratives of Latinos in Ohio project in 2014. And it was tied to a course. It was a course that was a service learning course where students had to work with the Latino community in Columbus, Ohio. And I really thought about how do we best prepare our students to really understand what it is to work with our community. And I didn't find a lot of things that reflected those experiences specifically in the state of Ohio or in the city where we were living, right? So, there's a lot of books or information at that time, right, about Latinos in the US in general. We still didn't have the collection, Latinos in the Midwest, the reader. And so there's very few ways of our students really understanding what it is, to be a Latino growing up or migrating into a state like Ohio. So the project is a video oral history, mostly in the recent, the last time in the summer of 2023, I did collect some audio-only oral histories, and I'll touch on briefly on that. Students have participated in the collection and archival work of this collection. So a lot of our students who were part initially, right, in 2014 of that course were also invited to participate as oral history, the part of the team. So we traveled across the state to begin sort of engaging with the community and collecting the stories. Today, there's about over 150 video histories, oral histories. They're all well, they're bilingual, so some of our narrators decide to have the interview done in Spanish or in English. There's a lot of code switching, a lot of Spanglish in some of them. And so that's another way to really honor the community that we're working with by giving them those choices, right? What is the language that they want to use to participate in the project and to tell their story? Again, a lot of this work that I've been doing, I connect or use in the classroom, right? So I have the students really think about what is it, right? A community that people still think, Latinos in Ohio, they think, or the Midwest in some ways, they think of newcomers, recent immigrants, and through this work, we're digging right deeper, and we understand that this community has over 100 years of historical presence, right? And in Ohio or in the Midwest, even longer, right? So I asked, the students to think about what is this personal connection that I might have, right, with this type of work, either collecting or listening to oral histories or using oral histories in my studies, right? How does this product, right, material help me understand the past and as it relates, to the present? How can narrators provide a link into the past to help me understand my own history? So in Ohio, even though the population is significantly smaller than a place like Texas, where I am, especially like San Antonio, it's very diverse, and we do have generations, right? We have now like third, fourth generation Ohio-born Latinos, and really shaping the way that they think about their own community and their identity and their place of belonging. What can I learn from linguistic practices then and now? This has been very important because a lot of the um, um, we think of sort of linguistic practices or Spanish bilingualism as things, or being policed, right, about around language issues, whether you can speak or not, Spanish, etc., as things of the past. And so students are able to listen to those experiences, from the 70s, 60s, 40s, right? And then also think about how is that happening now with me or in my community, and how deeply have I delved into this particular community and their experiences, right? To even begin the work. For me, it's important that before we start working with the community, that we understand what community we're about to enter. What is it like, right? What are the numbers? What are some of their linguistic and cultural practices? Because as we know, Latinidad is very diverse and complex, right? And so we cannot assume a single experience within our community. Another I think important thing to mention is that our narratives have been represent different generations, different heritages, right? Different even citizenship status, right? And so that allows the students to also think about their relationship with these communities. But I've also, as important it is to document sort of this older members of the community, I also find it very important to also let young people tell their story, or ask them, right, to tell their story and their perspectives and some of the concerns that they have, or issues or experiences that they have as Latinos in the state. So, this work with Latinos, in this picture specifically, is sort of like a perfect example of this intergenerational encuentro, what I call like encuentro. We have a young student who was working with me at that time, who identifies as Puerto Rican, grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, and then we're in Cincinnati, Ohio, interviewing this couple from Guatemala, who were immigrants to the state. And it was a really important moment, right? Sweet moment too, to have her listen, but also the ownership of the story that the couple had, but also as they were telling the story to a young person, right? So this level of sort of commitment from the narrators to pass down this history to a young person. And so that, that we always traveled together. And so I always been part of the work that is, of collecting oral history for many reasons. One, because as a project director or older person, but also for protection, right? Like, I don't want to send the students out into the community without alone or without really understanding or having sort of that rapport. And in case, anything happens, the equipment is not working, there's always better to travel in groups of 2 or 3. And I have this picture here just briefly to talk about this group, right? Mostly the oral histories that I've collected are single people, right? One person and me interviewing one person. Sometimes it's couples, like the picture we just saw, right? So it's been like I've interviewed a couple of mother-daughter initially, and then some couples, right, husband and wife. But this one was particularly unique and challenging at the same time, rewarding, all of the things at the same time. So this group self-identifies as the breakfast group, and they are from Lorain, Ohio. Many of them are not from this area, right? So they migrated, many from Texas, actually. And so they wanted to be interviewed together because they thought of themselves this unique group, right? That continues to meet every Tuesday. One of the men here in the picture passed recently, but that connection, they wanted that to be part of their story, right? The fact that they were in Lorain as children, and they grew up, and the games they played, and then going through life and different life stages, different um, uh, success and challenges that they've had, in this area, both personal and professionally, and then coming together as retired men and continuing to meet every Tuesday to continue that sort of friendship, right, that has lasted throughout the years. So I think about and when I work with my students, right, I think this for myself, but also with my students, about what is our ethical responsibility, right? And working with this community that sometimes could be seen or could be a vulnerable community, depending on many reasons, many things, right? And so I really emphasize the need for really thinking about the linguistics and cultural practices of the community or the narrator that we're about to interview. I also think about, I talk to my students about doing this work con cariño y cuidado. So this work as being relational, self-reflective, and intentionally caring, right? So we're there not to be extractive, not to just collect the story and leave, but it is a relationship. And I also remember preparing my students about possible meals, right, that their narrators might offer as we go sometimes into their homes, and they're waiting for us with coffee or pan dulce, or there was one time we had tamales, right? And so that's also part of understanding our community, that part, like convivencia, right? Doing this work is very, very much community building, communal in a way too. And so I prepare the students for that possibility. So I have integrated this work in the classroom as primary resources. I have on occasion had talks that invites the narrators to sort of do public talks about this work. It can be a part of a research, right? And I've done performance using the oral histories here. Renee, I just want a quick time check. I did not put how much time do I have? I can't hear you.
Oh, like maybe 3 minutes?
3 minutes? Okay. So one of the things that we did a couple of years ago was to begin thinking about how and when the narrators talked about their experiences with Spanish, right? And we created a performance about this, right? Experiences of language loss, gain, joy, pain, right? And this is one example from one of the narrators, and I'm not going to read it all, but it really talks about how the language in the 40s and 50s in North Ohio was difficult to maintain, and then the narrator expresses how it was almost right taken away from them. So the performances that we created, and this is a picture of some of the students that participated and perform in this particular performance about language, and they reflected right themselves. So we heard and repeated some of those comments that the narrators made about Spanish or language, right, in general. And then we also participated, I was part of this performances too, by telling our own experiences of language, loss, gain, etc. in Ohio. And so it allows for this dialogo, right? That's this dialogue, the performance itself with our community. So oral history is a community engaged project that signals that we are knowing with rather than just knowing about the community, which can be best achieved by pushing students, community, and scholars to use the stories in creative ways, and certainly in dialogue. This is another picture that you see here from a performance that this was the second group of students that I work with on performance. It was, we started before COVID hit and then when COVID hit, right? So this is also a representation of that time, right? Where we had to do recordings instead of a live audience, which provided different opportunities for us to have material about the performance, but continue the work as important as it was to document those experiences of people during COVID. And I'll stop here and we'll engage with more dialogue during the Q&A. Thank you.
Definitely. Thank you for that great presentation. Thank you so much, Elena. Marta, you're welcome to pull up your presentation. And once again, for anybody that watching that has any questions, you're welcome to pop them in the chat. We'll do a Q&A once we're all done presenting. The floor is yours, Marta.
Hey, thank you. So I am calling and I'm here from Rhode Island. I am originally from Texas, but I've been here for such a long time. And this is the name of the organization, Rhode Island Latino Arts. So you're going to get a presentation that's centered around the arts, and it just happens organically because of the nature of my organization. And I am also an oral historian, or accidental, I guess. All right. My screen is not, I think my screen froze.
I see your, okay, there you go. Yeah, it's gone.
We are, okay. So that's I'm going to get rid of this here. That is the mission of the Nuestra Raíces. It's dedicated to preserving, celebrating, and sharing. So those three pillars, the stories and lived experiences of the Latino community of Rhode Island. So it started when I moved here, and it was basically a longing to connect with my own culture. Like many of us who move somewhere, whether it's to a new country or a new state, I was looking for people who were similar to myself, who shared in my case, my culture. I was looking for the Mexican community, and I could not find it. And so I started talking to people, and that eventually became an oral history project. And that's why I say I'm an accidental oral historian. And this is up until since then, I've collected over 400 recordings, and primarily because I was doing this by myself. It was just a pastime, something that I enjoyed doing because of my journalism background. And so it was me just talking to people with a tape recorder. And eventually I learned that there had to be there's more to recording people than just putting the tape recorder in front of them. There were some best practices and some ethical questions that I had. And the story that young lady I was speaking to in that previous one is this woman here. Her name is Josefina Rosario, and she is the person that everybody kept sending me to. And it was because of her that I started this project. I went to her house. She invited me after I reached out to her. She's Dominican. She didn't have an answer for me in terms of where the Mexicans. She invited me and I recorded her story, and I discovered after much research that she was the first Dominican. She and her families were the first Dominican in Rhode Island. And she opened a market, a bodega called Fefa's Market. That's a picture. I've looked far and wide. This is the only picture that I've been able to find of it. It's opened in 1961. So that's really not that in terms of what the history of other Latino communities are in others in other states and also in the country. It's not that old. So 1960, 61. That's in my lifetime actually. This is what it looks like today. This is the site of the first bodega, and that's part of what I've added to my campaign to put the Latino history, the Latino culture in the public, to provide that to the general public. And out of that one oral history, and after talking to many people that mainly she referred me to, Fefa, came this project that started documenting. I started to learn more about the Latinos. I was looking beyond just that one person. And the furthest back I could go was the 1940s. Now that's a picture of some braceros. So the bracero program made its way to New England, and they came to Rhode Island and they spent 15 months here. So I uncovered this information, and it's still ongoing. I'm trying to find out more information, but that's as far back as I could go. And then jumping into the 1950s, so Fefa came in the 50s. She didn't open her bodega until the early 60s. And then the part that oral histories is informed, as I wrote the historical events inform oral history. So that was basically how I started to shape my my oral history, the documenting it. So I would look at what was going on around the world. So Fefa and Dominicans ended up in the United States because of a dictatorship of Rafael Trujillo. And in the 60s, as you all know, Fidel Castro, with also Cubans fled Cuba to the United States. In 1964, there was the first Colombians. That's that picture on the far left, bottom left. That's a group of Colombians. That's when they first came to Rhode Island. And then it took all that time since the Latino community slowly started taking shape and form. It wasn't until 1991 that we elected our first elected official, and she was Panamanian, probably one of the only Panamanians I know in Rhode Island. She was elected as a state rep. And then it was in 2012, even longer, that we elected our first mayor. That's Angel Tavera, and he was Dominican as well. So how did I get started? As I said, oral history starts with reviewing historical events. Then I spent a lot of time in archives. I attended workshops. I really wanted to learn more about the oral history practice. People were calling it my pastime. And even though it's fun and I enjoyed it, it turned out to be more of a practice. It's now what I do. I don't make a living out of it, but I spend a lot of time talking about the practice as opposed to a hobby or a pastime. And then I started interviewing people. Most of the interviews, I'll go over how I did that, came through grassroots efforts. And then from there, after several years of recording with my little tiny tape recorder, it was a little mini cassette tape recorder that I used to carry around. I had a lot of files that needed to be digitized. I wanted to get that information out there to people who, the Latinos who weren't getting a lot of this information in their history books. So I started digitizing all my audio tapes. So this is all audio. I wasn't doing much video. And even today, I don't do as much video. I put together some educational programs. I started going to the schools and sharing these stories. I have exhibits, and I also have public events. And this is what the very first interview, that little mini cassette there was what I recorded Doña Fefa's story. Those are the photographs she shared with me. And then I put them on CDs, and now we're into beyond CDs. And then there's the transcription. Those are that's the life of an oral history after I record it. So in terms of humanities forums, these people that are on this panel, I took them to Providence College. This is many years after I graduated from there. And about half of the people sitting at that table, I interviewed, and I invited them to share their story first person. And then the other ones were interviewed also to share their own stories. I've made visual art. These three gentlemen were the founders of what is called the Rhode Island College Latin American Students Association, LASO. We recently had an exhibition, and so those are portraits of them when they were young people, and they haven't really changed all that much. They're now in their 70s. And so that's another way that I share this publicly. We do storytelling. So we created a monologue. That's Doña Fefa on the right you saw that photograph earlier. And that's one of our actresses in the Latino Arts program who did a monologue of Fefa. And then I primarily go through the artists, and I thought, well, how can I get the artists involved? So when I started doing the oral histories of the Cubans, this artist here, Ana Flores, is Cuban, and I went and asked her to be interviewed, but she went beyond that. She became so fascinated with my project. She didn't know about it, and she got inspired to create some art. And she asked me for photographs, everything that I could give her, I gave to her. And then she created this visual art piece. It's called Café Recuerdos, and it's a traveling cart. I take it to schools and libraries and festivals, and it's not that easy to move around, so I don't do it as much. But I set this up. We brew coffee, so Café Recuerdos, if you know how you share information, the best way is over a cup of coffee. So we brew coffee, and that's what attracts people, is the smell of it. And they come over, I talk about the project, and then I give them a chance to record a story. And then if they want, I follow up with them. And this particular person, she's a Puerto Rican. She offers bomba en plena, one of our artists. And she appeared on the Café Recuerdos. And when she saw that, she was beyond excited. That's her there. And she now has become an ambassador. And part of what I do, and especially through the artists that are part of my network, I've been telling them very adamantly that artists are cultural preservationists. In everything that they do, they preserve their culture. And they also, they touch personal, oral history touch personal stories. They often touch on universal themes like family and struggle. And that's where the intergenerational aspect of the oral histories comes. Sometimes I'll have kids in school who their homework assignment is to go interview a relative, and they learn so much about it, and they learn about their struggles and their perseverances, and they learn from that, and it really makes them, brings them much closer to their families. And then this happened, we have a theater program, and this Broad Street is where the bodega, that first bodega is, and it's now become the center of the Latino community and the center of the Dominican community in Providence. And out of that, my oral histories, the local, the repertory company called Trinity Rep decided to do a play, and they put it on stage. They took some of the pictures. These are pictures of the many people that I've interviewed, and they selected, looking through my collection, and I have a book that I published. They selected some of these people who were part of the early days of the Latino community. And they used this as a way to share my oral histories. So there's the main character, Doña Fefa, and they used the photograph that I had in my archives to create her costume and to create her character as well. And this is why we do this. A story about family migrating for a better life might resonate with anyone. So it wasn't just the Latinos in the audience who had a strong reaction to the play. I had people who were Irish and African and some recent immigrants come up to me and said, you know, that's my story too. So it's not just, it's a universal experience that you have. And so when you take oral histories and put them on a stage like that, it reaches broader audiences, the themes. This is a picture of Fefa's bodega. In the play, they called it Rosa. And this is the original photograph that I had in my archives that they used to create that set. Here is an event that happened. It was a social action that in the 1970s, at that point, the community was tired of not having interpreters. And this is how it was depicted in the play. And here's the photograph that they used from my archive. And then they even took me and they put me in the play, which I did not expect. This young lady portrayed this oral historian who was recording the stories of Rhode Island Latinos. And that's me doing a story of this woman who happened to be the first Puerto Rican female mayor in Rhode Island, and I don't know, maybe even New England. And then I've turned the oral histories into visual art. So I commissioned this young man to do this portrait in the electrical boxes right on Broad Street. I've been trying to get the city to commemorate that spot as an important location for the Latino community. And I haven't really gotten anywhere. So when I commissioned, this electrical box is right in front of the bodega. So he painted her. That's a picture of Doña Fefa. And that is the marker that I use that depicts the location of the original bodega. And then I offer tours. I take people on Broad Street. I take them to the different locations. Many of the first sites that are significant to Latinos are on Broad Street. And so I do a tour. I call them barrio tours. We do them from April to September. And so how do I get my information? It's grassroots, word of mouth, trusted voices, people who can get people out to do interviews. So pastors and doctors and teachers. I talk about the project any chance I get, a lot. I talk about it. I go to schools, libraries, and cultural groups to pass things on. And it's mainly people are like, oh yeah, I have pictures. I moved here in the 60s. And so these are pictures of, those are actually Doña Fefa's daughters sharing pictures of themselves. And in order to give the project the future to sustain it, I have gone to, I've been trying to start a fellowship to teach young people how to carry on the oral history practice. So I teach a class at Rhode Island College. These are my 5 fellows and my co-professor here, David. And it was a way for me to expand the project and use the stories to also foster conversation. Here is that exhibit you kind of had a glance at the beginning. That's a tree. That's Nuestra Raíces. The students built that inside the library. And if you get up close, these are some more portraits of photographs of some of the people I've interviewed. And you can get a glance of this QR code right here. So if you scan that QR code, it takes you to my website and you can read more about that person. And these are the 25 portraits. The artist who did that electrical box of Doña Fefa did these portraits too. He took the photographs from my archive and he created these really beautiful portraits, and they're on display now at the library. Those are the people that he used for the portraits. And that's my presentation. Thank you.
Perfect. That was so cool. And I gotta echo Elena's what she put in the chat, how we love that it was presented as a play, like interpreted to the community and then affects everybody back. That's just incredible. So thank you so much, Marta. And with that, we'll go over to our last presenter for today, Karina, if you're welcome to share your screen. And then once again, for anybody watching, you're welcome to put any questions in the chat, comments for our panelists, and we'll do a Q&A once we finish up.
Perfect. Can everyone see my screen? Yes, perfect. Okay, so I have the honor and the pleasure of wrapping us up after two incredible and inspiring presentations that I'm personally taking notes from. But I have the honor of presenting one of our LXG projects, our Route 66 Abuelas Project. So for the individuals involved in this project, it's our lovely team leader was Asami, Mel was our GIS lead fellow, me and Brittany Jimenez were GIS fellows as well, and then Beatriz was our photographer and videographer. So for those of you who are not aware of our Abuelas Project, where have you been? Everyone should be aware of our Abuelas Project at this point. Our Abuelas Project is a really, really cool, innovative, grassroots online platform where we are collecting stories from our community and putting it in a way that our community is able to easily access them and also see the way that they relate to each other across the continental United States and Puerto Rico. So this QR code will take you to our platform that I, once again, have the honors of managing. But specifically last year, well, this year, it's just been an intense year. We had the pleasure of driving from Amarillo, Texas, all the way to the Santa Monica Pier over the course of 11 days. We actually drove it in a van. We did 2 media interviews, which was really exciting. We visited 4 NPS sites. And today, as I was writing out a report, I realized we actually conducted a few oral histories at preserved sites. Again, this was over 11 days. So it was get to a city, wake up, do oral histories, get on the road, go to the next city. We conducted 11 oral histories, and overall, we drove close to 1,800 miles over the course of 11 days. So I'm going to kind of go through this a little bit quicker since the other presentations went into great detail about the methods of oral histories. But as we had 3 fellows, Mel, she did Texas and New Mexico. I did Arizona, and Brittany did California. I'll go into that in a little bit. But we all kind of went about our methods for the themes we wanted and how we connect with oral histories a little bit differently. But what it really came down to, and what the other presenters have already emphasized, is that oral histories for Latina populations are going to go to our traditional ways of community gathering. So establishing trust. Sure, we start off with our themes, we start off with our research, but really what it ended up being was connecting to Facebook groups that promote local businesses and reaching out through social media, or finding one individual and trusting that individual to connect us with everyone else. And really when it was on the ground, when we were there, and people see you with a camera and they see you recording, they get curious, they ask what's happening, they ask how they can get involved. So for as oral histories being a method and really a practice that academia and public and practitioners take on, I really just want to highlight again that when you participated with a Latina perspective, you do find yourself going back to our original roots of how Latinx populations, how we collect with each other and how we talk with each other. And that reflects in our themes that we ended up choosing. So first of all, we started off with Texas and Amarillo, Texas, and we worked our way over to New Mexico. And Mel, what she decided to do with her oral histories is that she specifically focused on neighborhoods. So first of all, in Amarillo, she followed the story of El Barrio, which I believe was established in 1889 due to the rail workers, the Mexican rail workers that were working on Route 66. So what really came out of these oral histories, I believe we did 7, which was a lot for 2 days if you've done oral histories, is that El Barrio was very protective, and to this day, very protective of their neighborhood. They saw the way that Route 66 brought opportunities for individuals, but also at the same time, the route itself and the rail itself created a divide of who was able to own land on which side of the rail, who was able to promote their businesses, what does it mean to have a business to survive through the route, and see all the consequences of that. And we move on to New Mexico and Barelas, another historic neighborhood. where the themes that kind of came out of Abuelas is this intergenerational, this multi-generational approach to preserving your history. So in Abuelas, we did oral histories with a lot more younger folks, and the way that they together are coming to a lot of the shops that might have lost ownership of Latinx ownerships are now going back into that. How are you able to have safe spaces and spaces for us to gather to share that cafecito? So Monica here, she's done a lot of work of making sure that a lot of the sites that were Hispanic Latinx owned are preserved right now. And that'll go into our lessons learned as well. The next state that we visited, Arizona, Flagstaff. Some of the themes that I chose for this state is chisme entre amigos. So one of the things that we started seeing as we worked our way through is that when you ask an individual, what's the story? Give me, let's talk about your life. Usually what you might hit is, I don't have anything to share. It's not, my life really is not that important. There's other people who've had better lives or have done greater work than I have. And one of the things we really, really wanted to promote as we were going through and conducting oral histories is that every person's life is important. Everyone had something to share. So with Chisme Entre Amigos, our goal was to really just empower specifically our Latinas, our elders, our women, our abuelas, to share with us how their lives were important and how they impacted the community as well. So some of the things that kind of came out in between Chisme Entre Amigos is how women banded together through Route 66 to create camaraderie, to create safe spaces for women on how to protect themselves against violence that was happening. And then the other theme that we really explored in Arizona was decolonizing Latinidad. So as you start going through Route 66, you are going to hit indigenous and native lands. So we were very aware that we could not conduct oral histories without talking about how Route 66 impacted the lives of indigenous native lands. What does it mean to drive it? What really came out of decolonizing Latinidad and the oral histories that we conducted in Flagstaff is that there was a relationship between Latinidad and indigeneity, yet at the same time, there's a lot of tension in between there of indigeneity from Latin America to the area, but then also indigeneity that is native to continental US. What does that mean when you have a physical root that destabilizes economies, that destabilizes generations of land? What does that mean for us? So a lot of really important themes of harm that has been committed against groups, but also harm of how groups are able to come together outside of that dominant group. So then our last state that we did was California, which was a rush. We somehow did Barso, Santa Bernardino, and Santa Monica within 3 days or something like that. By this point, we were surviving. But what really was interesting by the time we hit California was that it was on our forefront that we had to really impact this counter narrative of how Latinos were living on Route 66. What really kept coming was that, yes, what's been recorded is the harm that's been conducted. At the same time, there are so many sites of joy, and there's so many sites of how resistance and grief empowered communities to survive a lot of the harmful policies that were placed on them, such as redlining. So really what we ended up doing in California, is that we focus a little bit more on cemeteries and churches and these sites that are traditional to Latinx populations in its narrative, but also provided safe spaces for our communities. So we did 2 oral histories here where we focused, one of them, Nina, to our left, she showed us that she herself had to create a map of where Latinx residents were living and how they do not live there anymore. So we talked about home ownership. And then our other oral history conversed with us about how creating museums and creating spaces where people can learn about their history, about what it means when you grew up in the area, you had to leave to seek out other opportunities and come back to that area. What does it mean to promote your heritage and all of that? So I know we're running close on time, and I want to talk about the lessons learned from Route 66. And one of them is emotional wellness was something that we expected and were confronted with and are still working our way through. So when you do oral histories of critical needs communities, you are hearing of why it is a critical need. You are hearing housing affordability is a problem. You are hearing active erasure is a problem, and you are documenting it. But when it comes to your forefront, it's a different conversation of the emotional wellness of the individual conducting the oral history and the individual who lived through it. So one of the things, for instance, in Flagstaff, when we talked about indigeneity and native lands is MMIP, so missing and murdered indigenous people. This is something that came up that we had to navigate. How do we go about writing this? How do we write about this with emotional well-being and the individual sharing this, but also us as researchers, how are we protecting ourselves through it as well? And it still comes up. Recently, one of our participants from Albuquerque, New Mexico, was recently murdered. So we've had to navigate how we have this oral history. We knew from his oral history that he did speak about the needs of the community. He did speak about the violence, and yet that violence is still there. So we have a responsibility to these individuals, to these communities, but also these family members. And how are we able to create long-standing relationships with them, that we are not just going in, extracting their story, but also continuously being a resource for them and having that cafecito after a long time. So again, that's one of our major lessons, is emotional well-being on both the researcher and also the participant side. And another one that I want to reiterate, because we've seen it throughout all three presentations, it's just the responsibility of us creating a narrative of what is the actual Latinx story across the continental US and across this diaspora. Making sure that, yes, we are resistance, yes, we've experienced harm, and at the same time, we are much, much more than that, that a lot of joy has come out of that, a lot of celebrations have come out of that. How are we writing that? Oral histories, as we said, especially with Latinx populations, they'll take control of it. An oral history can be anywhere from 45 minutes to, I've learned, hours. And it's, what is that individual willing to share? How are you able to protect that? How are you creating the story of it? Making sure the individual is in charge of, this is what I want to be remembered as, and this is where I want it to be remembered. And these are the people I want access to my story. So just making sure that, again, we are centering the individual, we are centering the participant. And when the participant is no longer with us due to various events, that the family also has access to us, and the family is aware that we have this video of your individual speaking and that we have these portraits, and they have access to that as well. So I'm hoping I'm able to give us enough time for a Q&A. I think I have 5 minutes. If not, I will stop right here and we can keep talking, because I'm excited.
You're good. Go ahead. Keep going.
No, I'm good. I think I'm done.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Oh my gosh. Thank you to everybody. Thank you to everybody who's joined us. Like we mentioned, we're going to do a Q&A now. I have a couple questions, but for anybody watching, including LHC staff, you're more than welcome to pop in a question into the chat, and we'll put those in priority for our panelists. So first, I want to thank you all, for everybody, for your just continued work on, just giving agency to the community to tell their story. I wanted to ask, because these are all active projects, and we'll go around in the order that we presented in. I wanted to just do a quick question of, how important is collecting stories actively, collecting them now? How important is that to your work and to the project? And Elena, I'll kick it to you first.
It's important. It could be a little tricky since I'm in Texas now and not in Ohio, but because I lived in Ohio for a very long time, I have deep connections with people there, with community organizations. So, for example, in summer 2023, because of my work with one organization, they were interested in documenting the impact that one of their events had on our community. And this is the quinceañera event, right? They have a quinceañera sort of celebration, community quinceañera. And so I was able to go and do oral histories of moms and daughters together, talking about their quinceañeras. And so, and especially in Ohio, I always joke that I went to more quinceañeras in Ohio than I ever did in Mexico, where I grew up. And so, so this is a thing, right? This is a thing in Ohio. And so one of the important things of having also an active project is that you can respond to what's happening, right? So that became key during COVID. Okay, so we still were collecting oral histories, but we were able to capture, well, what does it mean to have this experience here, right? And so we documented some related to the pandemic.
Yes, I agree with that. To me, it's like, well, history never stops, right? I think we all know that. And today's, and I use COVID as a perfect example as well. I mean, we're now looking back to COVID 5 years ago. That was history. And that's what when I approach people about sharing their story, I'm like, just think about that. 5 years ago, here we were all experiencing this international historic event, and now we lived it and we told our story. And I just think it's so important for me, that's why I created this fellowship. History doesn't stop with me. It stops, and it's never going to stop. I tell people I've been doing this 35 years plus because it's just never ending. You're going to find people who have stories to tell about their lives yesterday, and you're going to find people that would want to tell their stories, into the future and inspire the next mayor, governor, or business owner, or lawyer, or whatever it is.
Again, I echo everything. I think for us, it feels as though sometimes you are 100% running against the clock, whether it is you are not sure whether this individual will be with us in the next 6 months or not. And these businesses and these sites, especially COVID is a perfect example. Pre-COVID, we rarely had protections for our small businesses, and we know that our Latinx population mostly does participate in informal and small business markets. And post-COVID, a lot of these businesses are still very much struggling. We're still seeing mass closure of Latinx businesses and these historic sites that need support. And one of the active ways of all of us, we know we work with history, is that if this isn't documented, it's not remembered. And then fast forward, someone uncovers it and you are limited resources of what was the story. These are real people with real stories. So for us, it often feels as though we are running against the clock. We're a small team, we're trying our best. So we often engage with youth and we tell them, that in your high school, after the bleachers, you're hanging out with your girls, you're chismeando, all of that's history. All of that is storytelling. All of that is authentic to the Latinx population. And it's been curated to be this shame, to be this bad thing that Latinx populations does. But we've been storytelling, and we now have the resources to preserve it. So of course, active right now. I mean, I know that we've been working about like preserving our families, even ourselves. So I echo everything that's been said.
Wonderful, thank y'all. I have another question, but before I go, I just wanted to ask: do any of y'all have questions for each other?
I do, but I could go on and on. I'd like to reconnect in the future. I have a lot of questions.
Same.
Definitely. No, we're gonna exchange information after this and just stay in touch. Absolutely. Okay, so then my next question would be, all y'all talked about, doing this work on your own, but also in team with students, with coworkers. I want to ask, how does doing oral history work in team facilitate teaching and learning? I'm gonna go the same order. Go ahead, Helena.
Right. So one of the things that I noticed right away when I was traveling with my students is that we were able to debrief right away, right after the meeting and collecting the story. And I love just listening to them and see what their experience was at that moment and what they learned. And so that was such a key moment, right? Even though the class was much bigger than that and only a few self-selected to work with me, right? In this project, but it was very powerful for them to be there, to be present, during the collection of the oral history and the interaction with the community. But then those debriefing, road trips, like Karina's road trips, I imagine, had this just very profound, right, moment of thinking, reflecting, and also really like reflecting on your own positionality within this community, right? And so so to me that's been key. In Texas, I have that we worked with the archive this semester and found 11 narrators that had a connection with Texas. So those are the ones that we were working with. And I'll just say this really quick. One of the students who had told me she was from Tamaulipas and, from the North Mexico, where I grew up. And so I said, oh, I got the narrator for you. Like he has this connection with Tamaulipas. So she worked on it. Well, it happens. Then we later find out that his sister was her teacher, her art teacher, right? And she hadn't made the connection because that last name was different and things like that. But how this world that seems super big, Ohio, that seems, for people here in Texas or in San Antonio, my students, they're like, Ohio, like what is Ohio? And then to say, oh, wow, like we are so connected, right? Those moments are really priceless.
Yeah, definitely the debriefing part and hearing. So what we did, so with my students, I paired them as much as possible to someone who's connected to the major that they're having. Because part of what I'm doing, I think the excitement of doing oral histories, I think, is to connect someone that's like you or who you want to be like. And so I would connect them with a social worker, an educator, somebody wanted to be a politician or was elected, interested in that. And so that in itself was inspiring. And then coming back and just hearing the pride and the excitement of, I met somebody that's in a place where I could be, right? The inspiration they got from talking to that person. And then also when they were debriefing with each other is them giving themselves tips, and it kind of made me feel good that they were listening when I was giving the workshop on just little technical things and how to ask questions. I mean, asking question is it's challenging, right? To pose the right question. And so they ended up coaching each other, right? And it really was, it was very inspiring to me to see that they are learning and that they could, whenever they go off, whether or not they're going to, do this as a living or do more oral histories, they've gotten that takeaway now is the listening part, right? You need to listen intently. And then the inspiration that they got from meeting others.
Yeah, I applaud Marta for doing this alone for some time, because there's a lot of benefits from a team down to one individual making sure you're getting a consent form, the other individual taking pictures of the pictures that they have in this huge photo album, while the other person's making sure their audio is working, while the other team member is making sure that you're eating and that you're taking breaks throughout the day. And that was definitely a lesson learned for me, because you get excited, you want to talk for hours. So everyone ended up having a very specific role. And I agree with what Marta and Elena have said. All of our team, we come from different disciplines. So sometimes something would get brought up to our attention of some event that happened, and we all had a different understanding of why that event came to place. And because all of us were coming together, we were able to create these dynamic story maps from different points of views and understand it at this larger lens as well. And also the debriefs were critical. When you're working with these critical needs communities, and they're sharing these really emotional, traumatizing stories, you have to take the time to step back and be like, how am I processing this? Especially when a lot of us are first generation Latina students as well. A lot of this relates back to our upbringing. So being able to connect with each other and check in with each other of how are you feeling? Do we connect with this individual more? Do you know resources that we can connect with these individuals? I know we all as a team still connect with each other. This is very one way to create friends. We are all very close still. So I echo again everything from the importance of debrief and checking in with yourself to how incredible it is that so many brains are able to come together and create such an impactful project.
Wonderful. And thank you for the question in the chat. I'm going to go ahead and put this out to the panelists again. So, well, let's do a combination question. I like to ask this question of where do you archive your collections, along with, I asked this last year, what was your first ever oral history, whether it's tied to your current project or not? So what was your first ever oral history, and where do you guys archive your presentations?
So currently I archive my oral histories at the Center for Folklore Studies at Ohio State University. We are looking into transferring all the oral histories to the Center for Oral History at the University of Kentucky, working with Doug. I'm escaping his last name, just Boyd. Sorry, Douglas Boyd. For various reasons. One is the capacity that they have to actually host the oral histories using their OMS system, for transcribing, et cetera. So that's one of the for 2025, some of the changes. My first oral history was with this project, and everything went wrong. So I went, and it was my student that was working with me, and it's around what is it, full circle. We're doing another round of oral histories this month. I'm going back to Ohio, and she's helping me, and I'm super excited to have her work with me again. So we went to interview her dad, and so she was the person, Karina, in charge of like the video, making sure that we were within frame, that that she hit record and all of that stuff, that it was recording. Well, I was almost to the end of the interview, and I look back, for some reason, I look back at her, and she had this face like something had happened, right? And I'm like, what's going on? She's like, I forgot to hit record. And it was so funny because we were all so like fascinated, right, with the story. We were so into it. She was into it, and it was her father, right? That she forgot to hit record. And he was so sweet. He's like, oh, that's fine. This was practice. Let's do it again, right? What I tell this story often to my students, because I'm like, I've made all the mistakes so that you don't have to. And so I like list of those things, but important of having more than one person, right? Is really, I've done one person. I did a lot of one person during COVID, and it was very challenging having to keep track of all the moving pieces. But yeah, so that was mine.
Yeah, you're so right. That's basically what I do. I give advice based on first person experience, a lot of it. So, and my first one was, as you heard, was with the Doña Fefa, that woman that I met, and that's kind of how it got started. It didn't start out to be an oral history, and it ended up being what defined everything that even to this day that I do. What was the other question? I'm sorry. Oh, the archive. So I have my own archive. I have found, I think it's touch on something that Karina says. I really, I want the narrators to know that I respect their stories, and they have access to anything they give me at every time. And I have found that many of the institutions I approach, especially higher ed, and the Historical Society, they have so much red tape, so many hoops, just starting with the appointment, right? And that people come to a screeching halt when they say appointment. This was used to be in my photo album. Why do I have to make an appointment to see my own photograph? So I hit that. I used to work at the Historical Society, so I know the hoops that they put people through. And I decided maybe for now, I'm doing more work again. I have digitized and filed, and I have online presence for all of the audio and transcripts and photos and all of that, because I want them to be, and if people don't want them up there, you know, I have the power to take them down, right? So I really need to have, I've spent a lot of time building trust with all the narrators, and I want to know that that it's still their story. I'm just keeping it in a safe space for them.
Yeah, so we currently right now are working on building our archive. So we're still working on transcribing. We are still working on getting back to the community member and saying, hey, this is what we have. Is this still what you would like to be public? What would you like to be public? Where are we hosting it? All of that is still in the works. So we keep telling individuals that if you are interested in the work that we've done, or you're interested in the project, to meet with us and we can work on kind of giving the information. But right now we do not have it public facing. Give us some time. You know, we're a small team. We're doing our best. But hopefully in the future we will have the archive will be live. It will be public. I guess to promote it, we are looking for an archive fellow. So if anyone listening in works in digital humanities and wants to work with us, we need an archive fellow. Please apply. My first oral history. So immediately what came to mind is if we are talking in a technical sense of when was the first time I was a chismosa and I started asking my parents, like, but why? But who? And where was that? Probably at the ripe age of first grade. Whenever your teacher starts telling you critical thoughts, yeah, I think my parents were sick of me because I was going home and I was asking questions. My first professional one, where I was the one sitting with the questions, leading the interview, was actually this one. Prior to this, I've done a lot of transcriptions. I did a lot of organizing the interview afterwards, but this was the first time that I was really trusted to lead it. And for that, I am so grateful for, because I've grown so much as a professional and as an individual from being trusted to do this. So I really thank LHC and Asami and Sayla for that opportunity. So kind of like how everyone's been saying, this project.
Nice. Cool. Well, with that, I think we're doing wonderful on time, and we're gonna go ahead and wrap it up. So I'd like to extend a huge thanks to our panelists, of course, to our members who help support this kind of work, and to the projects that we're all doing because they are incredibly important. Once again, friendly reminder, in 2025, we're gonna have 4 more of these membership webinars, so be sure to spread the word. Yeah, share it out. And of course, this recording will be sent over to our members for early access, and it will be published publicly within 1 week on our website and social media. So keep an eye out, be sure to spread the word. And with that, we thank you so much for joining our LHC membership webinar for December 2024. Thank you and have a great rest of your week. Adios.